Water Ghosts. A novel by Shawna Ryan. Narrated by Laural Merlington. Copyright 2007 by Shawna Ryan. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Shawna Ryan and Writers House and was produced in the year 2009 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Prologue. The Founding, 1915. Her mind was taken with the thought of pussy willows. She saw them in the market, long-cut stems emerging from a bucket of water, 10 cents a bunch, each fistful tied with string. Her eyes lingered over them as she stood in line with a can of condensed milk. She weighed the can in her hand as she thought about the willows. Which vase she might use, which corner or tabletop they might decorate. She lived in a small apartment, kitchen crowding into dining area, crowding into sitting space, crowding into a room for a bed. That was all. The way the light fell through thick glass windows onto tea-colored walls would turn the brown branches gold. She thought of them as she lit the oil stove. The newspaper that covered the wall behind the stove was ready to be replaced. Yellowed already, torn, grease-splattered to a high sheen, it had done its job. Her mind brushed over the task for a moment, then forgot it when she thought of the blooms that could be added to the vase. The motions of lunch-making were gone through, measuring, adding, flavoring, stirring, as she lost herself in the idea of color. Lime-colored leaves, petals from heart red to eggshell blue. The little wood platform the stove rested on rocked as she moved her chopsticks. The wedge of wood scrap supporting the too short leg had slipped out again. She leaned to nudge it back into place. The sizzle of cooking oil obscured the sound of sparks lifting and catching. She stood up and slid her chopsticks along the thick black pan, and the sweep of her hand was met by the sudden sweep of flames up the wall, up the old newspaper. She shrieked and grabbed for a bowl of water. Her frantic turn knocked over the stove. She tossed water on the fire. It sputtered and grew. She tried again and again. The fire spread across the wall, licked at the ceiling. In the street, she huddled close to her neighbors and cried as they watched the fire spread from building to building. Although the river was only a few hundred yards away, the task of bringing water to fire was beaten by the strong north wind. The fireboat struggled. The people relied on yelling, shouting from Japantown into Chinatown for everyone to flee. Both would char and crumple. The fire grew so fast that no one except the woman who daydreamed of flowers was sure of its origin. The Chinese would say it began with the Japanese. The Japanese would claim the opposite, and both would live for days with the stench of toppled wood and of the burnt flesh of men, too opium-addled to escape. Li Bing, his 2 buckets of coin stolen by the deputy who had been asked to watch them, moved with his wife to the boarding house at Lockport. It was not even a town, just a cluster of buildings, a gambling hall, saloon, and boarding house, with a name. Located a mile from Walnut Grove, separated from the river by the levee road, it was a laborer's place. All those single men of myth, with wives in China and not enough money to bring them. The hallways were empty the afternoon that Li Bing and Bo Ying moved in. The rooms were laid out so tightly that they had to shove their salvaged table between the bed and the wall, with 2 fingers of space to spare. Bo Ying laid her jade on the table. Besides the table, chair, and some clothing, the jade was the only thing she had saved from the fire. Li Bing watched her eyes travel the cobwebs in the corner, the whitewashed walls and the floor whose boards were already beginning to warp. "It's a new building," he said. "Just 3 years." She nodded. She wiped her eyes. They had been married for 15 years, but she had arrived only 4 years before, left for 10 years, detained at Angel Island, and now this. Laughter leaked through the wall from the room next door. Some men playing a game. Li Bing banged on the wall with his fist. "It's only temporary." She stared at her lap and nodded. Li Bing decided to build a town. The Japanese and some of the Chinese had already started to rebuild in Walnut Grove, but Li Bing decided on a split, a town for each dialect. The Chinese from neighboring districts in Canton had fought for years. The Toi Shong could have Walnut Grove. The Chung Shong would rebuild here. Acres and acres of pear trees surrounded Lockport. Why not clear a few acres, build a few homes? Li Bing talked to other Chung Shan merchants. As his English was the most fluent, they elected him to negotiate. First there was the business of permission. Li Bing readied himself for important business dealings, cigars, whiskey, a handshake, and contracts signed in ink that bled across the paper. Instead of a formal meeting in a room with mahogany moldings and dark green wallpaper, he found himself on the porch of George Locke's house in the pear orchard. The sun was setting, dark pink like a sliced thumb beyond the black trees. George had passed away in 1909, but Li Bing felt his presence in the Negro family who lived along the river, rumored to be descended from freed slaves who'd followed Locke in his move from the South. Locke's sons gave Li Bing water with lemon, and they chatted on the porch about wives and children and the pear crop and asparagus and swatted at mosquitoes and gnats, and Li Bing thought, yes, this is how business is done in America, couched in leisure. They leaned on the railing and smoked and watched the sky turn from red to blue, the first star shining despite the last remnants of sun. Li Bing offered his proposal. Locke agreed to 9 acres and to clear the trees. The deal cleaved to the land law, passed just 2 years before, rented in perpetuity, not sold, and there was the twinge as Li Bing was reminded he was an alien without landowning rights. But now also founder of a town. He replicated what had worked so well, a boarding house and a gambling hall, and he added wooden sidewalks and a line of buildings with a store, a restaurant, and houses for families, with fancy fronts and overhanging balconies. People continued to call the town Lockport, for the wharf that stood between the town and the river. Misdirected mail to the town of Lakeport shortened the town name to Locke. A family town, fronted by a living memory of the Old West. Chapter 1. Strange happenings, Chloe knows, can take place in a town built on tragedy. After the Chinatown fire in Walnut Grove, the Chongshan Chinese moved over to the Locke family property to start over. The first building had been a store. A boarding house and gambling hall followed until a community had arisen and clustered around the 3 buildings. The town was called Lockport, then, eventually as tongues grew lazy and letters were lost, Locke. 13 years after the original fire, Chloe feels made and unmade by the air in the 2-road town. She has been turned into something new from sleeping alongside the other girls in the attic of Madame C's brothel to the sound of bats fluttering in the eaves spaces. She is of an untouchable caste, even as she lies now in the red room with Richard Fong's head resting on her chest. Tule fog presses against the windows and obscures the faint dawn light. It is summer, but the room is cold and gray, the lamp wick extinguished for hours already. The dark borders of the room, lingering like shadow people, push in around the bed. In the dim, Chloe sees only Richard, jawbone and lips to make you cry, and eyes dark as Valentino's, the mellowed pink tint of the sheets, and the cold hurricane lamp on the nightstand. Richard asks her to say his name. She responds, "Richard." "No, Fong Man Gum." Chloe's voice flattens out the curves. "Fong Man Gum." Once more. "Fong Man Gum." He grows hard inside her. "Fong Man Gum." He breathes in her ear. His breath staggers and falters. "Fong Man Gum." His sighs collapse and drags into the curve of her neck. Chloe lifts her hands and drags her fingers through his hair, pulls lightly. She wants him to hush, even as she utters his name a final time. "Fong Man Gum." It is June 22nd, 1928, and the morning of the Dragon Boat Festival. Back pressed to the wall, Poppy can feel the vibrations of his footsteps move down the hall. She smokes as she listens. She would like to sleep, but a premonition has awoken her. Bodies with seaweed-strewn faces under water, glistening and pale, with bloated fingers and delta crawdads scuttling through the water-heavy locks of their hair. She hoped it had been a dream, or even a memory. In her youth, shamed women had been pulled from the river with some regularity, but when she rose and turned on the light, she discovered that the bowl of dry rice at her small altar had been disturbed, and the incense sticks lay broken. Flooded with light, the room looked otherwise normal, but she couldn't stop the bird in her chest, so she went to the wall to wait for him. For 4 years she had opened her eyes to Richard's face and had inhaled his rank lover's breath in order to know that the horrors of sleep could dissipate with him sleeping beside her. Before she heard his footsteps, she heard the groan and ease of bed springs as he left Chloe's bed. Through her thin nightdress and the ridges of the wall, she feels his feet crack past her room. Fingers smash cigarette into gold dish. She leaps to open the door. His figure, jacket still uncreased and tight across his back, the drape of his pants over the curve of his heel, retreats down the hall. Disappointment draws her heart into a beating wing frenzy, but the next sight stills her. Behind Richard follows a woman in an old-style dress, snapped closed collar, sleeves falling wide like bells, and, beneath the embroidered hem of her dress, tiny bound feet. Against the harsh outlines of Richard's suit, the woman is so delicate she follows like an echo to a sound. Richard descends the stairs, but the woman pauses and turns to look at Poppy. Poppy freezes. Hand to the doorknob, legs in indecision as she weighs this against her visions. Through the woman's soft girlish face, Poppy continues to watch Richard's fleeing figure. The children will collect at the southern end of Main Street, near the slough and railroad tracks. The domestic quiet of 2nd Street slinks into the chaos of Main. Under the sycamores and willows, cars line the one-lane road. The stores will have lifted their blinds and opened their doors to the raised wooden sidewalks that fall in and out of light beneath the balconies. It is 9, and the fog is gone. Corlissa climbs the stairs to rouse her daughter Sophia for the parade. She knocks on the door. When there is no response, she hesitates to enter. She feels the headiness that often had come to her when she looked down from the window of their apartment in the city, the spin when each stone of the alley looked impossibly close, then dizzily far. All the dares that arise in a playing mind, to leap in front of a streetcar, to walk into the ocean with a pocket full of stones, to step out the window, initially came to her when she held her baby daughter. After Sophia learned to walk, the thoughts came on their own, and Corlissa learned to hold her breath when crossing the street, to count out the seconds until the cars passed. She glances down the hall toward her own bedroom door, ajar, room empty. Perhaps if Sophia had been a son, the thoughts wouldn't have come. 15 years later, they arrive even more often, now that Sophia's body presses against her clothes and threatens to burst out with hips and breasts and blood and milk. The lack of traffic and tall buildings in Locke doesn't stop Corlissa's urges, and the confusion that swirls around her, the only white woman in town not a prostitute, brings the flush of danger rising higher. Red-haired and freckled, she feels conspicuous, like a rag doll left in the street. Each corner she turns in her 7 months new town offers another solution. She's found an oak tree with branches that will hold a body. The gas released from an unlit oven is intoxicating, and, of course, the river is only a few 100 feet away. She knocks again. No answer from Sophia's room. She nudges the door open. Sophia disappears for hours each day and gives vague replies when asked where she's been. Summer allows for roaming, but the waves descend on Corlissa when Sophia comes home, non-committal in her answers, and smelling odd musky. Corlissa has not made enough friends in town for it to be whispered to her what her daughter is up to. She is unsettled enough to feel chilled at night when she thinks of this creature, her daughter, from her own body, who sleeps down the hall in the dark mystery of her room. Behind Sophia's door, discarded socks lie on the floor. A magazine splays under the bed, and fragrance lingers in the air amidst the haze of morning.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?